and working with students that have only been in engineering in their culture, or they're here as graduate students, where many, I'm learning now that many of the great countries that are developing engineers, it's still rote learning. And for us to have conversation and for them to be reflecting on themselves and their own thinking is completely new to them. It's really exciting. I had a letter from, an email from a man from India, just talking about how he sees himself now as being true to himself. He stops and thinks about a lot of his communications to people. And I'm so grateful that he's seeing it as being true to himself rather than, oh, I had to change. Just to share some of that, the excitement about it. And that's, to me, innovation too. We can get into neurological, structural differences. You have these on your handouts. I'm not going to go through them, all of them, but you have them. Brain chemistry under stress, that more individualistic people tend to respond with fight or flight, and more relational people tend to respond with tend and befriend. So there are whole different ways of relating to those things. And just so that you get this, I've worked in all different kinds of environments, so it's not just technology. I just think I'm sharing it from an engineering environment. But it is important to know that the current research says that there are no numerical calculation differences, brain differences. There is some significance in terms of spatial, three-dimensional thinking. And also with regards to time. But there is, again, there are no absolutes here. But there's no difference. There's been some controversy about talking about differences with regards to math and science. So here there's enough evidence that the strongest, most important attributes show no difference. And so spatial three-dimensional thinking, that might be something to do more training with women. But for instance, I'm very relational, but I know that I'm a spatial thinker. I've had enough evidence in my past, so it doesn't mean that it's exclusive by any means. So generally, the steps I use for encouraging people working with gender differences is first to acknowledge that there are differences. Stop making yourself wrong or someone else wrong. More relational people, they're more likely to say something's wrong with me. There's more of an internal directedness, whereas more individualistic people are more likely to say if something's wrong, like someone has a different opinion in the room, something's wrong with them. So those two things, unfortunately, really reinforce each other. I just recently added know yourself to understand differences. That's what's happening is people, it's not like women know all that they know. We don't even have language for what Leslie was playing. We could say she was collaborating. I mean, we're familiar with that, and actually a lot of people will make general statements that women do collaborate, but we don't even know what collaborate looks like. That's what it looks like. Half-baked idea, trying to build on it with ands, or other positive ways of reinforcing it. And you can still question what might be missing. Now, I'm not putting down devil's advocate. I think we need both. But what we're doing with not allowing angel's advocate, that's one of the men in one of my workshops suggested that we call what Leslie was doing angel's advocate. And you can drop the religious stuff if you don't want to. If you don't want to use it. But classically, angels were messengers bringing information. So that's the idea of bringing information to create more information. So we can name this. First of all, that's one skill of naming it. And it's another skill of asking people to adapt and adopt. Like Leslie could, if she was aware of this, she could say, Gary, I'd like you to play devil's advocate on this. But it's not a baked idea. As soon as we get this, scoped out more, I want your best ideas on this first. Now for Gary, it's gonna be very hard because he might even be, his brain might be wired, whatever it is. He is acculturated to playing devil's advocate. So
maybe the problem there was the goal of what the conversation was about wasn't made clear, because if you are brainstorming, I come from a creative background, brainstorming is about putting a bunch of post-its up on the board there and not judging first.
Right.
And you go and then evaluate later.
Right.
But it sounds like there was no clear maybe agreement there of what we're
That's
doing.
right, and that's what because she is coming from, of course what I want is to collaborate, and he's coming from, of course what's needed here is for me to bulletproof an idea without any consciousness about the difference. So for her to be able to ask for either, or for Gary to say, look, I'm used to playing devil's advocate, but if you want do you want me to tease this out with you first? Do you want me to give you my thoughts on it first? See, if they were both educated in these differences, they would both be able to adapt or adopt. And, but either one of them could do that. And it's also for Leslie to learn how to play devil's advocate and not take it personally. I've had numerous women see this scenario and say they've seen their whole career flash before their eyes. You too? Yeah? Do you want to say something about that?
I think if Leslie understood what was going on, she would not drop it. She would take some concrete action items and maybe go back with it, saying, "Oh, this is what I gathered out of this," and take it objectively rather than personally, right?
Yeah.
There was no action item. There was like, "Oh, fine, drop it."
Yeah.
If you think there's so much,
And it happens all the time. I did this with a biotech company. I was working with a group of engineers who built laboratories for engineers. And one woman gave the example of how she had presented an idea to her boss. He had played devil's advocate, and she just dropped it. It was clear that he didn't think it was an idea. And 2 months later, he came back and said, "How's your project coming?" And she was flabbergasted. And then there was an exchange between one of the men who said to her, "Well, you should just have confidence in your idea." And she said, "Well, I don't think I should just know it's a good idea. I think it's arrogant to just know it's a good idea." And he said, "Well, if you don't, then you don't, you just don't." Yeah, and so it went back and forth, and it was just such a beautiful example of the differences, not understanding the value of each other. So usually we do an exercise. I'll have you try it on, but we don't have a lot of time to do that. But I do want to convey in terms of getting back to innovation. Even Deborah Tannen says that you can drop, new ideas are dropped. But I did this with a group of the local space agency executives. I had a small workshop for them as part of their yearly retreat, and I'd overheard earlier in the day one of the executives say that his greatest concern for the organization is that there were no ideas bubbling up from beneath, from the lower people, and I made note of that. And when the devil's advocate came up, I suggested that there may be some influence here of devil's advocate in the culture, and he turned to me and said, "Bonita, we do science here. Devil's advocate is science." And I really appreciate the confidence and the groundedness in his commitment to devil's advocate. And then I asked him to just do the exercise, and that what it would be is that I would pair you up, and one of you would make a proposal to the other person of an idea, and then you first play devil's advocate, and then play angel's advocate, and get the experience of the difference of building an idea on an idea rather than just bullet holes, and vice versa for the relational people, to get a sense of standing up to it. So after the exercise, I asked him how it felt to switch back and forth. And I got to this executive, and he said, actually, we started out with Angel's Advocate, and we had so much fun with all the new ideas bubbling up. And he was great enough to use the same expression. He said that we didn't even switch to Devil's Advocate, because he could see right then that this was a source for innovation, and that this could be what was stifling people from wanting to stand up in front of a firing squad with new ideas. And he they decided they have a culture where often they do Saturdays for special educational events, and they decided to do a half-baked idea Saturday, where people would be invited in to bring their ideas that are just, in some form of formulation, and be able to come in and present them without having to stand up in front of Devil's Advocate, but they get input from others. So it's my personal, interest in always looking at what an organization's primary concern is, and seeing what gender differences can contribute to that, to resolving that. But I've been describing this to a few people in the last couple of weeks, talking about the class, and I was surprised, but I wasn't surprised. I had two people. One was an HR executive, and one was a woman whose husband works for IDEO. How many of you know what IDEO is? Okay, I figured you would. IDEO is a company. Well, do you want to say what IDEO is?
It's an industrial design firm which designs products, and there's a great video on their process, and they have one of the most amazing, innovative design processes you'll ever see.
So, the book by the co-founder is called The 10 Faces of Innovation, which I only found out about recently. So I just checked it out on Amazon, what I could get out of it, and the first paragraphs right there on Amazon is that Devil's Advocate kills off ideas.
If you're interested in seeing it, there actually is a really great video of them process in 48 hours to design a shopping cart.
Great.
It's the most incredible. You see a room full of Post-its, literally this room covered in Post-its. That's how they start. Everybody has a seat. Nobody's shot down. It's like, how many things can we put around? And then they vote. They kind of choose. But the first thing is like anything. It's really great.
So, I'm clear. I'm excited about it. But it's just, on the other hand, it's also an example of, here it comes out in the latest and greatest for innovation. And what we've seen, look at it embedded in gender differences.
What was that book called?
It's called The 10 Faces of Innovation. Now, and I'm still...
Faces or phases?
Faces.
Faces.
James can tell you more about it too, obviously. But what is it that we have to look at for the video? Where do we get the video?
There was a show, I don't know, still on 48 Hours. It was one of the network
Okay.
news
Okay.
magazine shows, but
And IDEO.
they had a week, and they had to design a new shopping cart, and it's about the whole process.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
So, for me, both of these people that I talked to, the HR executive and the woman whose husband works at IDEO, just by my talking about Devil's Advocate, they said, oh, that's what's new and different about innovation. And again, here it is, right here. So, I'm not saying don't do Devil's Advocate. It's just both in its place. And I'll certainly watch the video and see if at some point they do a critical analysis. But if we're concerned about innovation, We need to be recognizing where our prevailing culture has stifled it.